always emotional occasions. But for Harry, the Ark Royal's launch will always be something special.
The Queen Mother launched the Ark Royal. I remember the day vividly. I remember walking down the steps. And I was standing at the bottom of the steps, and I'm sure she smiled at me. You know, there'd be thousands in the yard watching this launch of this ship.
Reg Gooding worked on the second Ark Royal. He was a leading figure in the trade union movement. Now he spends a lot of his retirement gardening. His ticket into the yard was the fact that his dad worked there.
Nepotism was the name of the game. In other words, if you had a relative working at the firm, the odds on were that you would also get a job. In 1945 came the time to start my apprenticeship, and I went down to the engine shop and started on the spanner bench, as they called it. And for 2 years then I went through various departments, and I must say I was not impressed with the conditions. The grease and dirt in the engine shop, in fact the whole of the yard, it was really horrendous.
There were no official tea breaks either, so you had to be sharp about it if you wanted a brew. But if you weren't careful, the foreman would have you.
When I first started down the yard, they were pretty strict. In fact, we had one particular guy, he was a manager, and he used to kick the cans over. When he went down the slipways and the men had the fires with the cans on, or they were alongside warming, he'd kick them over, and nobody dare say a word, otherwise you'd be sacked, and nobody would be brave enough to own up that it was his can of tea that went over, you know.
Clock watching was an industry in itself. There was even a toilet clerk checking to make sure you weren't wasting time away from the job.
Well, we all sat in line, and it was flushed, just an open pipe at the bottom. And the apprentices used to light papers at one end, and set fires, and they'd float down, and you can imagine what happened. Everybody's jumping up the toilet, aren't they? With the flames shooting up.
One place the Lairds men could escape to was the canteen, where they were always guaranteed good grub and shelter from the cold. The yard was renowned for its family atmosphere, and it's no surprise why.
So my husband was a plumber here. My son served his time as a fitter. My daughter served her time as a silver service waitress. She worked here, and at one time we were all on strike together. There were a lot of favourite meals. Curry was a favourite. The chicken curry on a Friday always used to run out. And the cook, Sally Jones, well, you had no cook like her, she was the best. It must have been the highlight of the day.
After dinner it was back to work. For the yard's crane drivers this meant a long climb. Billy Suckley kept a visitor's book in his cab, and anyone who popped up for a gab had to sign it. It didn't matter that they had a 100-foot hike to get there.
They were like little gypsies' caravans, really. They were painted out, a bit of carpet on the floor. They were really, really nice. In fact, somebody put a notice on the bottom of my crane, Billy's Calf. This is the way it used to go them days, and he used to smell it. And it was drifting out the window, the smell of getting near brew time, got bacon, egg, black pudding. But this is the way it went.
Not everyone at Lairds was lucky enough to enjoy the perks of being a crane driver. Conditions in the yards were hard, and the unions faced an uphill struggle to get a better deal for the workforce.
There were a lot of national negotiations going on with the SRNA, which is the Shipbuilding Repair National Association. And so much so that in the end, swan hunters went out on strike for 4 weeks holiday. And this was 1967. And I think the SRNA had had enough of us. So they locked all the draftsmen and planners out in every shipyard in the country.
The men protested outside the gates, but it was a peaceful demonstration. The lockout dragged on for 12 weeks, but there were always characters like Billy Suckley and his bugle to keep spirits up.
I'd get down on the gate and it was a bit of fun, but it was a serious business.
At the end of it, it just so happened that everybody, the SRNA, capitulated themselves, and we all got 4 weeks holiday. So there was a good improvement in the wages and working conditions, and mainly through trade union activity.
Despite the lockout, Lairds continued to secure orders. two major contracts finished in '69 were for the nuclear submarines the Revenge and the Renown. Contracts as controversial in this century as the building of the Alabama was in the last. 1975 was the year Rod Stewart sailed up the charts with a song that was to become synonymous with the Ark Royal. 2 years later, Lairds was nationalised to become part of British shipbuilders. Its emblem, a humped camel, passed into the history books and was replaced by the letters CL. The following year, the yard celebrated 150 years of shipbuilding and opened the new construction hall. It cost £32 million to build and meant ships could be made inside with no time lost to bad weather.
It was great. We went and we worked regardless of weather, and the idea was the modules could be assembled, put onto a slipway and extruded. In other words, we'd build a piece of ship and move it out from the shelter of the hall, whereby men could work under cover, which they hadn't done from shipbuilding days.
I think we were the first to undertake the upside-down manufacture of the hull, for instance, and particularly on frigates. I mean, the biggest problem for welders was the overhead welding, whereas if it was upside down, they could weld downwards, and then the cranes would come along, lift it up, turn it over, and stick it on top of the frigate that was being built.
Two of the first ships built in the construction hall were the Type 42 destroyers, HMS Birmingham and HMS Coventry. Both saw active service in the Falklands conflict. Only one of them would return home. War was the ultimate test of the Lairds men's craftsmanship. They were proud of the role their ships played in regaining the islands. HMS Onyx, HMS Conqueror and the Atlantic Conveyor, a container ship converted with Laird's help. The men prayed for a peaceful settlement, but their hopes were shattered when the Conqueror was ordered to sink the Argentinian cruiser, the General Belgrano.
We as Lairdsmen were always proud of the construction, whether it be a submarine, a warship, or any other type of vessel, and we were proud that it could take part in the Falklands. We were very excited when we learnt that it had sunk the Belgrano, sadly with the loss of 300 lives. But we were proud of our workmanship. This could have been the other way round. We could have lost the Conqueror.
In retaliation, many British ships came under attack from the Argentinian Air Force. One casualty was the Atlantic Conveyor, which was offloading stores when she was hit by an Exocet missile. 12 men died. There were more fatalities to come, including the destroyer HMS Coventry, which was bombed and sunk.
We were devastated when we heard about the loss of the Coventry. It saddened us greatly. We had a very strong relationship as well with the men that worked on board these ships. Very intimate we were, and when a ship was lost, we felt very saddened and devastated by the loss.
The Laird's men hoped the launch of HMS Campbelltown in 1989 marked a new beginning for the yard under its new owners, VSEL. 4 years later, not even Laird's prestigious history would be able to save it. When HMS Unicorn was handed over to the Navy in June 1993, 170 years of shipbuilding at Birkenhead went with her.
The town of Birkenhead, it was Laird's, wasn't it? I mean, I don't think there's a family in Birkenhead or the Wirral Peninsula or even parts of Liverpool who haven't had somebody connected with Cammell Lairds somewhere along the line.
One of the reasons to save the yard, not only for all the industry, but was for the lads coming on. Now they've got no future at all, lads starting in. And this is really the fight was to save the trades right the way through people, jobs for the youngsters.
Friendship, the knowledge and the expertise that was in that yard during my period of time was second to none. And people went all over the world, and they only had to mention Cammell Lairds, that they trained at Lairds, and apparently they welcomed with open arms.
I, as a manager, was ably supported by a good team of workmen, who knew their job. They were the best. They were men of iron.
It was the end of an era for the men of iron. Their skills no longer needed in a world of changing demands. Now Cammell Lairds lives on through a repair yard which bore the name, a far cry from the shipbuilding days of the Mauritania and the Ark Royal. But William Laird's legacy will never die, not while there are still ships at sea that bear his name.
You can go down many an engine room now and find that great nameplate in the engine room with a red camel on it. The old timers still liked it, and we were proud of that red camel with its CLS.